Ridley, the list of films that you've made is so diverse. There's period and contemporary, there's intimate and extravagant, there's earthbound and otherworldly. What would you say this movie allowed you to delve into and explore in a way that maybe you hadn't before?
I knew you were going to ask that question. And first of all, with me, my plan is that there is absolutely no plan whatsoever. And so I'm a little bit like a child in a toy shop, and I develop a lot of material, but when something comes by that is this special, I grab it like a teddy bear. And so I read, and the job for me is reading. You can't let someone else read for you. So I read the script, which was so-called, had been on the shelf for a year or two, and I read the script and loved the play. It's all based on the play. Gentleman on the end there. The hardest thing to do in what I do for a living is write. The writing is the single hardest thing. Once you've got it on paper, making the film is very easy, from my point of view. And therefore, it's how I cast all these wonderful people to actually do their thing and show me what's what.
David, your screenplay has so many moving parts. You're shuttling back and forth between all the different parts of the story, and yet you really have to keep the momentum going the whole time. How did you manage to do that? Were you constantly going back to the script to make sure that everything was kind of propelling itself forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent the movie is kind of a hybrid, strange hybrid of what we think of as a conventional kind of kidnapping thriller and what we might call the great man kind of movie, a la Citizen Kane. And each of those genres in and of itself, we feel like we've seen before, but this was the effect of sort of smashing them together and seeing what came out of that. And that was really what it was really sort of shuttling back and forth between the sort of the need to sort of propel the movie forward as a thriller, but also be more introspective and look into the lives of the characters and the minds of the characters.
Michelle, there's so much to balance as Gail. She's going through this traumatic experience. She's in a family situation that's very complex, and she's fighting back. What were the traits that you were really focusing on and wanting to put forward as you were playing her?
Well, one of the things that I thought was so interesting about it is that what you're really seeing is a woman operating in a man's world, and what it's like to have those confines and how you try and work within them to get the best result. And what I saw was a woman who kept coming up against the walls of her own sex and their sexism. And as far as, the our script was a perfect map. And the map told me, she was conceived as a woman, and this is entirely true. The Italian press vilified her because she didn't give them what they wanted, which was drama, soap opera, confessional. They wanted something that they could sell, and she refused to give them something that they could sell. She kept her wits, she kept her integrity, and she got her son back by refusing to fall apart. And mostly when we see her is in relationship to other people. There aren't really a ton of private moments for Gail. So we see her as someone who is actively trying to keep things together. And that's really, it was in the script, it was in what really happened. And the challenge then is to contain all of that feeling, all of that emotion, and keep it together for that long of a period of time.
Ridley, when the decision was made, by the way, a month ago, to reshoot 22 scenes of this film, and the movie's done, and look how great it is. When you think about all of your department heads and cast and crew who had to drop everything and do this, whose life was made the most difficult by this decision? I would imagine your location scout would be up there, or a location manager, not scout, manager. Who else had to do the most kind of Herculean work to get this on?
Well, the decision came pretty fast to do it. I met with Dan Friedkin and Bradley in an office here. I said, we can't let this fly. And he said, no, so we did this prior to discussing this with anybody, including the studio, because this is Dan's film, Dan's money. and I wanted to honor that process, and I could not let this fly and damage his investment. And I knew always I somehow would get Christopher, because Christopher was always on the list. He would probably say, "Why the hell didn't you ask me in the fucking first place?" But he was always on. He and Kevin were there together. That's it. Because when I read, I'm seeing somebody. When I'm reading, I'm going, oh, and that's how I cast it with a very good casting. So anyway, once the decision was made, that was made in a room, very private. He said, "We're going to go for it, right?" So the person I then called up with is my line producer, who's more than that. He's very good producer, Mark Huffam, who's Irish. Said, "Right, here's the lay of the land. What now? How do we find out?" So within, I would say, 13 hours, we knew what to do, where we were going. I had to go and see. I had to make sure you're available. Make sure you're available. I had to go and make sure that he wants to do it. And I've got to pop downstairs to see Mark Wahlberg and say, "Come on, dude, get off your ass and come do it." And so that's what it was. So it's pure organization. And once you hit the ground running, we all know what to do. It's about consummate professionalism for everybody.
Charlie, the character you play is someone who a lot of people would have a hard time relating to just because of all the privilege that he comes from. But what was your way into him and feeling like you understood him and related to him?
Well, I think there is a lot on the surface that, I mean, not a lot, but certainly some things on the surface level that I could connect to, especially, this is a 16-year-old kid who was with all these adults at all times, and some of them were Mick Jagger and Andy Warhol, and not that I've been in those rooms, but there was certainly that aspect. I started acting when I was 12, and I've been surrounded by adults and some pretty talented ones like these much of my life, and I think there was certainly that way in. But I also think for this character, so much of what I think his struggle is being so isolated for so long, and I think that's definitely not being kidnapped for 5 months, but I think a lot of people can probably connect to that feeling at one point in their life, especially young people. I certainly could, so I think that was another that I certainly connected with.
Christopher talked about all the different colors that you get to play in Mr. Getty, colors that the man himself might not have necessarily had, we were talking about. And David, I think the words that you crafted are so fascinating. Was there one character who you particularly relished fleshing out with the dialogue?
I think Getty was a very enjoyable character to write because there's obviously a really kind of strange psychology to the man, in terms of the internal conflict within this guy. He wants his grandson back, but he doesn't want to spend any money to do it. And so there's this constant back and forth as these things are playing out, but he's also smart. There's a fierce intelligence there at work at the same time. And that's really interesting. He's a guy who you actually he's not shallow, right? In the sense, it's like he's got insight into money and what it does to people. He just doesn't have insight into what it does to him, and that made him a really interesting character to write. But I think all of them were in their own way.
And Christopher, what was it like for you to read that? I mean, the dichotomy between how he deals with his money as far as not wanting to use it towards the ransom, but then we see him, buying these paintings. I mean, it's just jaw-dropping. What was it like for you to read all that and imagine that all this was going on in this man's head?
Yes, I agree. I had all these offered to me so nicely by the writer, and I think my favorite scene was the one in which he talks about how he likes things better than people, and sometimes I agree with him. Actually, they're immovable, and that gave me a clue to try instinctively to make him a little more human than perhaps he was thought of. And I think that's important because he can be doubly sort of evil and tense if you try to make him warm. Like if Iago, the worst villain of all time, if you play him with enormous sort of charm, he is more dangerous than ever.
I think great wealth can create the void and the moat around the person who has the money, because I think they become withdrawn. They get withdrawn for various reasons. People who were friends are no longer your friends. Envy kicks into it. Envy is a very evil thing. And so the person who is the target of all this wealth has to withdraw, and therefore he's on his own. So to a certain extent, I felt a little bit of empathy and felt kind of sorry for Paul Getty. I think that's where
Yes, what I
yeah.
was trying to achieve, yeah.
I learned an interesting phrase in talking to you all this morning, which is the concept of rehearsing on film. And this was a way that Ridley likes to work that, Michelle, you described, and it sounds very sneaky. But it seemed to work. Can you explain?
Cheap, dude, really cheap.
Did you get used to this idea of him saying, let's just rehearse it on film, and then saying, oh, that's the take, that was great. That's what I wanted.
Look, I just loved it. It made me wake up each morning with a racing heart because I thought, oh boy, you really have to come out like all guns blazing. There's no warming up. There's no getting comfortable. There's just your first instinct, the thing that comes off the top of your head before you really know what could happen out there, before you've really worked out what the problems are going to be in terms of blocking or dialogue or interaction with another actor, before you work out what the problems are and then solve them so then it becomes a little bit safe. We would just launch right into it, and it became my absolute favorite thing, and now I'm just utterly spoiled on it because you're capturing something that's really alive. It's the first time that you've done it. You don't know exactly where you're going. You don't know what's going to happen, but you're well prepared and you're well cared for, and you just jump off the cliff and you do it. And it was exhilarating.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for sticking around.